In this video, I'll teach you how to manually contour the work hours for a resource assigned to a task in Microsoft Project. Did you know that when you assign a resource to a task in Microsoft Project, the software assumes that the resource will work the same number of hours per day across the life of the task? But did you know that you can also manually contour those work hours to show that the work is front-loaded, back-loaded, or some other distribution of work over the life of that task? In this video, I'll show you how to do that, so let's get started. There are two locations in Microsoft Project in which you can apply a work contour. The first is the Task Usage view. To apply a work contour, double-click the name of the resource assignment on the task whose work you want to contour. In the Assignment Information dialog, click the Work Contour Pick List button, where you will see the list of the built-in and available work contours. Select a work contour and click the OK button. The second location is the Resource Usage view. To apply a work contour in this view, simply double-click the task assignment for the resource whose work you want to contour. In the Assignment Information dialog, again, click the Work Contour Pick List button, select the contour you want to use, and click the OK button. Let's go back to the Task Usage view. In the Task Usage view, I want you to notice that I've included the Work Contour column, which will make it a little bit easier for me to demonstrate each of the work contours. Notice initially that every task's default work contour is the flat pattern. What that means is, if Mickey Cobb is assigned to work 80 hours of work over 10 days duration, that means the work contour will be applied using the flat pattern of 8 hours per day over the life of the task. But you do have other choices. The first work contour available to you is called backloaded, where most of the work is assigned at the end of the task. Let's go ahead and take a look at this. Notice how the numbers start out small at the beginning, and then they start growing across the life of the task until the largest numbers are right at the end of the task, and then finally just drops off a little bit. The opposite of backloaded is the front-loaded pattern. This pattern has most of the work assigned at the beginning of the task. So notice on this pattern, we have 8 hours a day assigned at the beginning. There's the majority of the work, and then it starts dropping over the remainder of the task until at the very end you can see the smallest numbers of all. Another work pattern is really unusual. It's called double peak. Double peak, the numbers start out small, jump to a peak, drop to small, go back up to a second peak, and then drop at the end. Let's see how they look. Notice they start out pretty small, but quickly they jump to a peak. Then they drop again to small, and then they again build to that second peak of 8 hours a day, and then they drop off at the very end. You have two other patterns that are related to double peak. One is called early peak. Early peak means the numbers start out fairly small, jump to a peak pretty quickly, and then trail off to the end. So when we look at this pattern, starts out small, jumps to a peak, then they start dropping off and trailing off to the very end of the task where you find the smallest numbers of all. Late peak is very similar to early peak. This is where the numbers start out small at the beginning and then they build to a peak at the end. So you can see these numbers start out very small at the beginning, and then they build across the life of the task, getting bigger, bigger, till they hit the peak of 8 hours a day, and then they tail off at the end. Another pattern is called bell. And this reminds us of the bell curve that teachers like to use for grading their students. With the bell work contour, the numbers start out small, build to a bulge in the middle, and then drop off again to small. So look, very small at the beginning, but they're building, building, building. Here's the bulge right in the middle. There's the bulge. And then they drop off again to the smallest numbers at the very end of the task. A related work contour to the bell pattern is called the turtle pattern. The only difference between the two is the numbers at the beginning and end of the task are larger in the turtle curve than they are in the bell curve. So notice with the turtle work contour, the numbers start out bigger, they jump pretty quickly to the bulge in the middle of 8 hours a day, and then they drop off again, but they don't drop to as small as numbers as previous. Now let's go back to the flat pattern. One of the things that I want you to notice, and I believe is the reason why people don't use work contours more often, is the price you end up paying with duration increases. Notice my original duration with the flat work contour is 10 days. But if I start changing the work contour to backloaded, the duration now requires 16 2/3 days. Front-loaded requires the same duration. And then double peak requires 20 days duration, as do early peak, late peak, and the bell pattern as well. Your duration requirement doubles by using those work contours. The least costly work contour in duration terms is the turtle work contour, which costs you 14.29 days versus the original duration of 10 days. So I suspect that is why people don't use work contours more often. However, there is one more option available that will allow you to create your own work contour. If you don't like any of the default work contours included with Microsoft Project, you can create your own manual work contour simply by typing the work hours in the time phase grid using the pattern that you want. Here's my custom work contour. I want 2 hours a day for the first 2 days, 4 hours a day for the next 2 days, 6 hours a day for the next 2 days, then 8 hours a day for 4 days straight. Then I want 6 hours a day for the next 2 days, and then 4 hours a day, and then finally 2 hours a day for the last 2 days. Now, the key to creating your own manual work contour is to make sure that you preserve the original planned amount of work, which in my case was 80 hours. Notice that Microsoft Project describes this work contour as the contoured pattern, which means a manual contour that I created myself. A final question you might have about work contours at this point is whether you can apply different work contours to the resources assigned to a single task. The answer is yes, you certainly can. Let me bring the work hours into view for the build task, where we have Calvin Baker and Keith Dahl assigned to this task. Let me assign backloaded to Calvin and front-loaded to Keith. Notice how Microsoft Project schedules the work for Keith. The bigger numbers are at the beginning, while for Calvin, the smaller numbers are at the beginning. Calvin's numbers grow, while Keith's numbers decrease over the life of the task. Notice also that Microsoft Project calculated a duration of 16.67 days. Now let's do something slightly different. Instead of front-loaded for Keith Dahl, let's choose early peak instead. Notice again that for Keith Dahl, now the numbers start out smallish, and then they grow to the peak at the beginning. But I do want you also to notice that the duration has changed from 16 2/3 days to 20 days. Why is that? It's because it takes longer for Microsoft Project to apply the early peak work contour to Keith Dahl's resource assignment. So if we look at it, we can actually see that Keith's work extends further into the future than Calvin's. Notice, here it goes. Here are the extra days that result in the longer duration of the task. And that's how you use work contours in Microsoft Project. So now you know how to manually contour the work hours assigned to a resource on a task in Microsoft Project. Gee, I sure hope this video was helpful to you. If it was, be sure to like, share, subscribe, maybe even leave a comment. And if you'd like to hire me to provide Microsoft Project training to the project managers and schedulers in your organization, be sure and leave a comment down below and I'll get back to you right away about that. And as always, I'll see you in my next video.